You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. On today's programme, Cyclone Seroja hits Australia after causing devastation in Indonesia. We're looking at if climate change is to blame for more extreme weather. It's back to beer gardens in England. We look at why your locally sourced burger is 3 times greener than one in South America. And greenhouses, the Italian architect tackling building emissions by 3D printing homes out of clay. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and meet those coming up with the solutions. This show aims to take you to the heart of the climate crisis, explain the data driving the changes that are already affecting us, but also show you just how far we've come. Now, Cyclone Seroja has made landfall in Western Australia, causing damage to homes and power supplies. Such powerful cyclones are rare in subtropical Australia. The storm took an unusual path because it interacted with another cyclone, Odette. This phenomenon is known as the Fujiwara effect, and it could become more common as climate change is expected to alter weather patterns. Before hitting the town of Kalbarri in Australia, the cyclone caused far more damage when it struck Indonesia and East Timor.
Habis itu air sampai di titik kepala, jadi orang bisa keluar yang lain.
Prepare yourselves before we go into red alert.
So how likely is it that extreme and unusual weather events are linked to climate change? Well, joining me now is Dr. Freddie Otto for the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. Dr. Freddie Otto, is it possible to know if climate change has had an impact on this cyclone?
It is too early to say what the impact of climate change is on this cyclone. But what we do know is that because ocean temperatures are now higher in places where they didn't used to be high enough for cyclones to form, that we do see an increase in cyclones in places where they were very rare. That doesn't mean that every cyclone is more likely or more extreme because of climate change, and we don't see a general trend in that. But we do see them in places where people were not used to cyclones.
And extreme weather has always happened. So how do you attribute a single event to climate change?
Extreme weather has always happened indeed, and every extreme weather event has always multiple causes. But in the same way that, for example, after a volcanic eruption, a big volcanic eruption, when you have lots of particles in the high atmosphere that block sunlight, you have an increased likelihood of cold events in the 1 or 2 years that it takes for the particles to wash out. In the same way, increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere do change the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. We see particularly a strong increase in intensity and frequency of heat waves. We see fewer and less colder cold waves. And for all other types of extreme events, the changes are very different from place to place in the world. So in Southern Africa, we see an increase in droughts. In Northern Europe, we see an increase in extreme rainfall. We also see an increase actually in extreme rainfall associated with tropical cyclones. But because there are always multiple effects playing together, for most complex weather events, you really have to look at the local scale to know exactly what role climate change is playing. But we are increasingly able to do that.
And if global warming continues at its current rate, more generally, what's going to happen to the weather?
So if it's continuing at the current rate, we will see even more devastating heat waves. People usually think about heat waves, oh, it's time to go to the beach. But heat waves are already, even in the UK, by far the most deadly extreme event. So last year alone, more than 2,500 people have been killed in a heat wave. And so globally, we'll see much more of that. We also see more extreme rainfall events, especially the very localized events that have a lot of rain in a very short time, leading to flash floods. And for other extremes, it really, again, depends on where you are in the world. So droughts also increase in the Mediterranean and parts of Southern America. And when a tropical cyclone is happening, they are more devastating because of the increased rainfall that climate change brings with it.
Dr. Freddie Otto, thank you. And you can hear more from Dr. Freddie Otto on our Climate Cast podcast, and you can find that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you normally get your podcasts from. In today's other climate news now, and a new technology could reduce carbon emissions from the UK's aviation industry by 60 million tonnes each year. Satavia has developed software that reroutes aeroplanes to prevent them from leaving cloud trails called contrails. Scientists believe contrails are bad for the environment because they trap heat from the Earth's atmosphere, which warms the air. Joanna Lumley and Chris Packham are amongst the celebrities backing an appeal to save an Ethiopian forest. The charity Tree Aid will give communities in Matema the tools and training to restore nearly 24,000 acres of woodland. The forest is particularly important as frankincense is found there, which is used in essential oils around the world. And ever wondered how your shopping habits affect the environment? Well, MasterCard is launching an online calculator which lets you work out the climate impact of what you buy. The calculator will also tell you the number of trees that are needed to offset your purchase. Now, pub gardens and outdoor dining reopen in England today, and for many, the weeks of looking forward to a meal and a pint at your local are finally over. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to look at the climate impact of a pub classic, because depending on where you eat, it seems not all burgers are created equally. A cheeseburger, chips and a pint of lager is a pub classic. So let's take a look at the emissions produced if all the ingredients are sourced from the UK or the EU. And that is a total of 6.1 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, CO2 equivalent means the number of metric tonnes of CO2 emissions with the same global warming potential as 1 metric tonne of another greenhouse gas. Now, most of that 6.1 kilos is the environmental impact of beef. And so let's compare that to a similar meal prepared in Latin America, and you get 3 times the emissions, 19.8 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And again, the majority of that is down to the beef, but it's much higher. And that's because developing countries have to transform land to have space to graze cattle and grow crops, meaning an increase in deforestation and pollution. And worldwide, 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions from the food system are from developing countries. So let's speak then to Dr. Tara Garnett from the University of Oxford about this. So Dr. Tara Garnett, why does the meat industry produce emissions like this?
Well, there are 3 main sources of emissions from the meat industry. The first is what you might call direct emissions. So in the case of beef, that's methane, which animals burp out, and it is a very potent greenhouse gas, as you mentioned. The second source is land use change, and that can be either direct or indirect. So when it comes to direct, we're talking cattle grazing, but there's also the hidden land use change impacts of feeding animals, and that's pigs and poultry as well as beef, things like soy and maize and so forth, where forests are cleared and land is ploughed up, and that also generates carbon dioxide emissions. And so that links to the third point. It's the feed that they eat that has an impact on emissions. And when you look at this, you find that all meat and all animal products has disproportionately high environmental impacts well above plant-based foods on average. And beef tends to rank highest, but it does depend on where you're sourcing your beef from. When it comes to Latin America and Brazil specifically, it's worth remembering that we live in an interconnected world, and that beef is also being produced for export. So a lot of the time, we think that our emissions don't look that high, but we're actually importing somebody else's problem, or rather, we're exporting our problems to them.
And we don't want to put people off their pub grub that they've been looking forward to for months. But if they did want an eco-friendly alternative, what should they do?
Well, I don't think there really is an eco-friendly alternative. All beef generates, and indeed all meat generates, high environmental impacts. I would say if you're lucky enough to get into a pub today, enjoy your food, enjoy your pint, enjoy your beef burger, but remember that meat. That the best way to reduce your climate impact is actually to just eat less of it and less often. And, meat used to be a celebration food. It's what you'd save up for. It was a Sunday dinner. And I think there's a role for meat in our diets, but we need to remember its value. And that means, eating it for celebrations such as today, but shifting more to eating maybe a veggie burger or other plant-based foods.
Dr. Tara Garnett, thank you. And if you want to understand more about what terms like CO2 equivalent mean, just head to our website, skynews.com/climate, for our A to Z glossary. Now then, let's take a quick look at our data dashboard. And I want to show you this number here, which shows you how much our planet is warming right now because of human activity. And as you can see, it's ticking up every second. Now, in the 2015 Paris Agreement, 196 countries around the world agreed to work towards keeping global warming below 2 degrees, ideally at 1.5 degrees, in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And below it, you can see this clock here, which is counting down second by second as we head towards that 1.5 degrees of warming. Now, emissions from the building sector reached their highest ever level in 2019, and manufacturing traditional materials is particularly energy intensive. Cement produces approximately 8% of the global total of CO2, a greater share than any country other than China or the US. So, Italian architect Mario Cucinella wanted to do his bit to try to come up with a solution. His answer? 3D printing houses made entirely from raw earth.
Buildings in the next 50 years will have a very big impact on the environment. The paradox of the next year will be, in one side we want to reduce emission to zero, the emission of CO2, and on the other side we need to build billions of square meters. Tekla is the first experiment of a house building in clay through the WASP company. So we're matching the idea of an old material we will mix with the new technology, 3D printing, and creating a house in clay. Maybe the future is also to look our past and discover the knowledge we have lost in the last 250 years. Maybe the next cities where we would like to build a smart city, green city, zero-to emission city is a city in clay, but mixing digital and old material.
Well, that's it from us for now. Coming up on the Daily Climate Show tomorrow, the clever solution giving single-use PPE waste a new lease of life.
We've got around 3,000 faulty single-use face masks here. What happens is they go inside the machine at the hospital for around an hour. What comes out is this 20-kilogram block of plastic.
That's at the same time tomorrow here on Sky News. See you then.